Okay, I would like everybody to go around the table and say what you love about me most. Anyway, that's the beginning. Santo, you're first.
Words escape me.
I have one. He's the best kisser at the table.
Oh, okay. Oh. Santo or me?
You.
Aren't we talking about you
Yes,
this
well, we
time?
were briefly.
We're always
Soon
talking
we'll
about
be
you.
talking
We always
about
ask what-
Jules.
Yes. All right, so my first question is, when you first read the play, what did you think?
Incomprehensible.
Incomprehensible, you did?
Actually, I heard it read the first time, and
You hired a group of actors to read it for you?
no, I was with you
Oh.
in that room on Fifth Avenue, and I loved the sound of it. It was just, I loved the.
It made a huge
Is
difference.
it
I was
prose?
there.
Yeah.
Well,
Do we
it's,
call that prose?
well, except when it's verse.
I loved it.
Okay, so you didn't read it?
Well, I eventually read it.
Yes,
read
but
it
so your
to
first
try
time
to
you were
find
hearing it.
clues for
Yes.
what poor Carol
I read it
wore.
twice, actually.
And you still
So
found it
did I.
incomprehensible.
Yeah, I
Why?
did. Because I found that you had to really, I read it out loud in a hotel room, which there were no complaints from the neighbors.
That's a good idea.
But I then had to read it sort of like following it down just for what I needed, to know about the room and when they mentioned physical things that had real references that were pertinent.
Mm-hmm.
Someone asked me recently about the bodies. I said, well, it was spelled out, and they do say, as they still do. But then the changes started, quite honestly. And then I had my list of references, but I didn't really go back and study it. Because it is, you know, when it's easy to read and when there are jokes, you get it. And then when it was more Shakespearean, if you will, it wasn't so much harder. It's just that it's a whole other way for me to look at it somehow.
What did you guys think when you first read it?
I mean, my first, and I read it, and I love the rhythm of the verse, but for me it was all Janice, and it was all woman's work. It was all, I just felt the feminine digging in and bailing out, and the constant of woman's work, and I loved that. And I felt so connected to that right away. And I didn't really understand Gary right away, but I understood Janice, so that was my entree.
That's
And
interesting.
when we
That's-
talked about it together, she presented that view, which I had not seen at all when I read it. I saw
Because you were
more.
closed off to the oppression of hard work of women. Are you ready to make that confession here, Jules Fisher?
I didn't see that either. But I saw it more about anti-war. But I didn't understand the play. I read it twice, and I went to the first reading, and I still didn't get it until I saw it. Until I saw what you made of it. I didn't, when people like my wife would say, what's it about? I couldn't quite say. And I said it has funny things. It's got some slapstick, it's got burlesque, it's got poetry, it's got politics, but I still couldn't summarize. Now I think I could.
Yeah.
Well, how would you summarize it now?
Anti-war, poetic.
Yeah.
No, but I think it is trying to foresee the future, or foresee the moment. He's showing us what is really happening now.
Yes.
And
What I see.
And the audience gets that with very just from is it an autocracy or democracy? Maybe.
Yeah.
That's a big sentence.
What was the thing that has surprised you most about Gary? Either the journey of it, or how it ended up, or response. What is the most like? Oh my God, I didn't see that coming. You know what I mean?
I didn't have that.
But I'm talking about having gone through the whole experience now.
Well, as Jules said, for me, simply, the futility of war, the blood, the killing, the horror, clean it up and start over again and do it over again. And I just found that amazingly real, and I actually could sit in the theater and see this play continually going. I would be interested in that. I mean, it's an absurd idea. But there's something more to this play than I got out of it, probably. And that has to do with my limited imagination.
I don't think.
No, I'm
No,
serious.
no.
I'm serious.
It's dense.
It's dense.
Oh,
I use that word.
It's
yes.
dense, and because, we saw it 40 sometimes, but who's counting? And what I found interesting, because as I think I said to you, Jules, you're a better listener than I am, was how people responded. Watching the audience understand from the 36th preview as opposed to the 4th, and how, quite honestly, Christine to me, and how she modulates those speeches from the carrying on, antic aspect to when it turns into, heartfelt and clarity. It's the clarity of how she delivers the speeches is really amazing.
There are two other areas related to that which baffled me in the reading and in the my reading and having actors read it, was the fooling. It's really summed up in one sentence. They're going to kill me. So
That's right.
That's right.
I see this. I read this elaborate description of what happens, and we didn't come together as a ballet or a piece of choreography until very late. So on the page, I didn't. Well, what is it? I couldn't figure out. I understand penis is left. I didn't get it, and then seeing it, I got that. It's summed up real fast what it is.
I think the biggest surprise that we experienced was the development physically and visually from the beginning of sort of a surround with these elements of bodies and the growth of this and our sort of, we were saying we didn't have a lot of success in the planning stage because we planned for something, but we actually were required to deliver something that was happening on a daily, hourly basis.
100%.
And we almost actually had to go back to an experience that we rarely have of it being somewhat experimental and trying, and there's a certain asymmetrical, almost muddiness of the bodies and the space and the steamy smell of the whole thing that we only could modulate by trying it, and we don't. It was a almost sort of trial response, like going to you and saying, what do you think about, how did that feel, how does it look, how does it, Jimmy, how did that thing? And the fooling, as you point out, of doing one version of it and letting it sit there and letting the show develop around it, and then coming to the change of it, toward the end when we had finally finished the show sort of around it, and then this thing emerged in the middle of it, and then the thing was more the highlight. That was really a different kind of path than we'd normally take. We'd normally do so much more regular planning of this will be and this, and we'll have these in our toolkit, and we were here going like, okay, well, now it's watercolors.
Yeah.
Well, when you first met George, before you were in the theater, did he reveal a very primal instinct to you of his, right or wrong? Like the first instinct he had. He did to me. And then he might change it and back and forth. But I could never get it out of my mind. And in all honesty, that's what I brought those papers for today.
But what was that?
Very hard work, very dirty, very, very, very real, but the costumes were costumes. They were not first century
They were
Rome.
not clothes.
They were not first century Rome.
Yeah.
And I don't think you said that, but yes, you did, in probably a nicer way.
They're clothes, Anne. They're not clothes, they're costumes. Well, one of the things which is fascinating to me, because the last time we worked together was on Iceman Cometh, which is an established piece, and admittedly we played around with it, but we're playing around with it, and I think one of the things you spoke to, it's a new play. And it's a new play happening on Broadway, and it's happening for the first time in previews. And
unwieldy.
Exactly,
and it's
totally,
a new prose,
exactly,
and very new.
And it's a new play and a very unique, odd, wondrous, challenging, difficult play. I mean, which is horrifying, but it's also, I think, a lot more fun because in the not knowing is possibility. You know what I mean? Was this? Oh, veteran that you are, how was this?
Well, when we got to the theater with the actors, it was very tough. I mean, the first few days, and I said to myself, because when I'd go home and would just sit there in the dark, I'd think, I really fucked up here. This is like, they want a sliding board, and now the sliding board doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and they don't really. But in fact, and then I said, no, you don't have time to go there. You have to come in, and we did have, mercifully, a great crew. I mean, not only the regulars, but the ones who came every day, who, when I said, now we're going to take this staircase out, and we're going to build another one with a different regiment of stairs, and they'll be more regular because Nathan, it was working with the actors and you, but trying to get Nathan, and specifically, comfortable. And he was very good. I mean, he would be like, well, I really, slightly apologetic. But so it was like doing, as I look at it, coming into the theater, and for 2 weeks, I would say, it was our workshop. We might as well have been in Westbeth. It really was what I kept saying, as I said at the beginning to Scott Rudin. I said, this needs to be out of town. I said, I don't want to go to out of town. But I said, we need to be at a regional theater with a prop shop next door, so I can say, no, we need this 6 inches small. It has to be like things I did in my youth at La Mama, where you would build something, the director would come in and say, no, a little more over here, and we would do that. The next day, he'd come and say, oh, that's much better. And we ultimately sort of did that.
Yes,
and then you would find more things forever.
Well, that
And, where you asked to have them climb up the stairs, and I kind of ignored that. And ultimately, we did it. And they ascend there and do the assault. It's fantastic. The whole siege moment, as I call it, And it's because, as I said, not critically, George, the problem was there was the mound, and you had like 8 things happening there. And it was like, well, we can only do 3 of them now.
Yeah.
So what should we try to do? And you sort of tried them all and decided.
Yeah. Well, you have to play. I mean, the hardest thing in the world.
It is, of course.
It's neurotic.
It's pressured.
Yeah, totally, 100%. But you have to let go, and that I think is
play does not happen on Broadway.
But it has to.
Of course it does.
But if you're going to make art, but you know what I mean?
There are certain people, I am one of them, who that's the way it's got to be.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah. There was. And we have to say, I mean, regardless of them saying, oh, you can't have a crew call and you can't do this.
Oh,
we
baloney.
Did manage.
I don't believe any of that.
It doesn't help us because the next time they just remind us how we did it. But we did manage to squeeze it out of the mornings and the this and the that.
Yeah.
And the next time they say, well, you did it last time.
That's
in 3 days.
That's a problem. Yes.
You know, it's like on my first show, which we did together, The Jelly's Last Jam. I had forgotten, you know, Susan Burgundy, who did the lyrics. She said, you put in an entire act 2 in previews, and I did that because it was my first Broadway show, and so I didn't know that you shouldn't do such things and that people are writing and judging and all this sort of crap. But then as time goes on, I think you have to hold on to that degree of kind of stupid fearlessness when you're working a new work. But it becomes harder because there I was naive, now I'm acutely aware, and now we've got internet and all that other sort of crap. Who gives a crap? But you still got to maintain that sense of extraordinary play, not only just on any show, but really particularly on this show, which was so much about play. The play was in contrast to the horror in a really interesting way. Yeah. So we had to approach it the same way as well.
That was one of the areas, I'm back to the fooling again, that confused me in the writing and even in the theater, which is, it was and this happens in, I've done this in other shows, where you have to put on a show that's not supposed to be good. I mean, you know, the audience should know that it isn't great in the plot. The plot says, and that I didn't realize also. So we're lighting it because you would say things. I was trying to figure out why was that being said. You channel this gentleman, and she does, and said, well, here's what it was. So that, because we could have made it slicker, it could have looked like Hello Dolly or something, you know, something fancy.
I want to see you make this look like Hello Dolly, and go. You go.
Hello, Donald. but you know what I'm saying? It wasn't meant to be perfect. It wasn't, right? All the elements.
Well, maybe not perfect, but what you do, I think, is that there is a real transformation when and I think the reveal when you changed it so that we swag open and we see the space has been altered. And of course the reveal where people actually do think they're still the dummies. So we get all that sort of corny children's theater payoff. That's because that's where he lives.
Exactly, which is why I play with you so much. Exactly. No, but also, at one point, it became clear to me. I said, "Oh, in addition to telling the story of how to cope in a world that is falling apart." At one point, it became clear to me. Oh, one of my jobs is to reduce the audience, turn the audience into groundlings.
Yes.
To invite them into silliness and vulgarity and outrageousness, thereby making them vulnerable to the language and the ideas. But, you know what I mean? And so that therefore, if they are open to fart jokes and penises dancing and a kind of silliness, that the net result, the silliness is not the goal. The silliness is an effort to reduce their New York sophisticated resistance, so they're available to the horror and both the horror and the possibility of the play. And at the same time, while we were doing this, the play was being rewritten. You know, and the play was being recast because of injuries and stuff. So in some respects, it was like this uber new play because everything kept on being new. The play kept on being new. The work on the set and the costumes and the light kept on being new. The actors kept on being new. The words kept on being new. And so it was just this thing that was perpetually shaking, shaking and moving and changing, which I think in the middle of it seemed, oh my God, but ultimately is reflective of what you do when you do new work. You know what I mean? It's just part of the brutality.
And in the preview process, seeing you in the back of the theater every night where we've been, cutting through it, all during the afternoon, and your sense of sort of a sort of a willing calm about that night's performance and what can possibly come from it, and overlooking maybe the things that they're bumpy or not solved yet or whatever, is where we draw a through line of progress, of progressing with it the next day and the next day. 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 And the next day way to be in previews, the allowing of the process in previews instead of the why wasn't it polished or what happened in the thing that went wrong, instead of the development of what emerged.
Well, it grows.
And it's just an incredible feeling that we have of reliable artistic endeavor, like to see
It
that.
gives us a chance to try things and be risky.
One of my big, gigantic theories about theater is an audience can tell when you are recycling an old truth, and they can tell when they are in the presence of something that you discovered just for them. They can smell it. They can
That
smell
I believe.
and everything else I've said you don't believe,
No,
but that's
not
okay,
the
Ann. Keep it
beginning.
moving. Cut. Anyway, but
The
you know
parents
they can smell when it's something
That I
that you
believe.
learned 4 shows ago, and they can tell when they're in the presence of something where we went, oh, I get it. That's connected to that, and I think that's part of the dynamic, and that's, you know, Tanya Pinkin said, which I don't remember saying, which is a really great thing, so I hope I said it, said brilliance exists in an idea that might not work. And in something, I mean, it's like, how do you turn a stage full of dead bodies and allow them to be ridiculous 1 minute, and then in another scene, you see the weight of that they're dead bodies. How did you do that, Mr. Loquasto?
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Answer the question. Thank you.
Well, the question.
We have an answer for that. after
Okay.
Santa.
Well, the question was just the style of the bodies, which I think is something we really talked about, you know, in my studio, that they were never, and it was, of course, the marvelous graphics on the show, the Stedman.
Yeah.
You know, that those were, as we said, we looked at them together, you showed them to me, and I said, well, that's just the simple line drawing, that it's a rag doll, that it is not, even though they're bloody, and we are, you know, and as you know, we added the blood sort of later in the process, because I didn't want to just pour blood on everything and have it just be grisly.
It's wonderful the way it spreads out.
But but to sort of keep it as an illustrative, keep it as a real visual gesture. It's not anatomically correct,
No.
and that's why it's also.
Oh, it makes
that's why
great
you
It's not
can.
realistic.
You know, you can, you know, when they flop the
It
bodies
would
around,
make
they
great
laugh because it's
wallpaper.
just stupid. You know.
Yeah.
I would love to have it made into wallpaper.
You would love to have it made into wallpaper.
Oh my God!
Well, there's
yes.
that bedspread downstairs that's similar to this. We should show you. Actually, that was a
No,
gift.
if you did 6, 8, 5, holding hands or not holding hands, oh, these drawings, it would be great.
I love the one on the left where he's upside down. His head
Well,
is
the
hanging
one
down.
sitting,
Stage left.
that old fart right behind George. I love
He's
him.
a poor old
Were you, of
thing.
course, calling the dummy George in that old part, not George, the person who's moderating the
The whole
conversation?
background.
Well, there's one up there
For
that I think
years.
is very scary. I don't like him. He's
Really?
Well, because he's a little bit, don't go to the cemetery after dark. He's a little bit of that.
Jeffrey Dahmer.
A little bit.
They're a little
bit
too old for Jeffrey.
Yes, yes,
They're-
yes. Yeah. Oh, okay, thank you, Anne, for sharing that warm, cuddly moment.
Related to what you said, Santo, one of the things that we did, and Peggy worked on a lot, was to make the bodies look different at every.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Sometimes
You did
see
that.
detail. You see just a number of faces. Sometimes you see whole bodies, and sometimes we use front light and flatten it out, and you don't. It's just it's a piece. It's a shape,
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
and that changed all. through
Oh,
the
it's
show.
wonderful.
And it's also that moment where the environment goes away, the sparkly Roman world, and you're just left with the mounds of bodies. And I think that's a very, very, very startling, wonderful moment as well. You were going to say something, my dear?
I can't. It's too complex in my mind. At some other time when I'm drinking,
Oh, okay.
I'll tell you what I'm thinking.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It has to do, though, seriously, with is it Carol or Janice? Christine.
Janice.
Janice feels that if it doesn't get tidied and clean, she will be killed. Killed. and that that these were people at one time. That's what I find so.
No, I think that really is as interesting. And that's one of the things that she's arguing for their dignity. She's arguing for their dignity, and
Yes.
and Gary is arguing for the irreverence.
Yes, that's exactly
and,
right.
And that is, it is the battle between order and chaos. It is how art is made. To me, on some level, the play is about many things, but it's also about the process of the making. And you need order. And then you need order, you need craft, you need structure, and at the same time you need irreverence, and you need to go, fuck it, let's blow it all up. And if you have just one or the other, if you have nothing but order, it looks like a lot of things. If you have nothing but chaos, it looks like nothing. And I think in many respects, the journey of the show was finding that balance, finding the balance between letting the audience feel as though they were in the presence of visual and linguistic order, so that they could surrender to the irreverence and the chaos of the ideas. And it's the tension between those two that I think makes the play work. And if you're just in presence of chaos, they're going to defend themselves.
When did that come to you in your life?
What?
When did that come to you in the life of this early on 42nd Street in the rehearsal hall?
I understood it abstractly. I understood it abstractly as a dynamic. That's what Janice, at one point, Janice says, reverence and irreverence. And at one point Janice says, and she's indicating herself and Gary. And so I understood it intellectually at one, very early on, but then it took a while for me to figure out how to manifest that order and chaos equation, and to realize that it's not just an idea in the play, it is the play. It is the shape, it is the muscularity of that. And that's what the previews were about, creating enough clarity so an audience felt confidence in their arrogance so they could surrender to the play. And until they felt that confidence, they couldn't surrender. Certain very smart, tuned-in people got it very early on, but you have to create the clarity so everybody can find themselves inside of it.
When this is all over, I want to read you some notes that are on my phone. Anyway.
You know, the thing about the audience, it does take a certain audience to really appreciate this.
Oh,
I don't
yes.
think it's a mass audience. I mean, it takes someone smart enough to say, I get that little.
Or available. Or available.
Yeah, available.
I mean, I think available, and I think also because anytime somebody, there are these buildings in this section of town in this city called New York that is Broadway. And some people come in with a very rigid definition of what Broadway is. And then other people come into these buildings waiting to be surprised. And those people who come in with a very rigid definition of what Broadway is, some of them are surprised and excited, and some of them go, no, but to me, that's what I'm excited about, is every time you go into a building, it's just a holding tank for ideas. Yeah. That's what Broadway is.
Often they come in
I
not able to
agreed.
accept something because they went through red curtains, red seats, velour, it's gold decorated.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then that curtain goes up and you see this.
Yeah.
That's shocking
Perfect.
and wonderful.
Exactly, but that's what I love about it.
Me too.
And then sometimes the curtain rises and it looks exactly what they expect.
That's
and
right.
I think,
more often than not.
Yeah, but I think there's room for all of that. A little hostility there, Anne?
Nothing. No.
Yeah, so that's what I think is fun. Should we discuss penises, Santo?
That'll bring them in. What's this for? What is this round table about? Who's going to be viewing it?
The universe. It's going to be projected into outer space, and it will attract aliens to come and take over the planet. And we will be their
That's
leaders.
what I was hoping for.
Yeah. I don't know, was that fun, silly, stupid? Well, crafting that?
You mean the mechanical ones?
Yeah, the mechanical ones.
Well, the mechanical ones were a whole thing, a series of phone calls, and then FaceTiming, actually.
FaceTiming.
What?
Oh, that's good to know. Okay.
I did, yes, we did, because I called, when we decided we would do this, and I think I did a couple sketches and said left to what he says in the script, you know, essentially. And I called Craig Grigg, who is the penis engineer, as we say.
PE. Special skills.
I called him and I described what it was we wanted and how they had to be worn and how they had to be not too heavy and all that. And it was a lengthy conversation, how they couldn't be too huge, which was actually the problem because they're like vertebrae. And getting them to they needed a certain amount of space. So that's what he worked on. And he worked on a mock-up, which took some time, and then FaceTimed it to me and showed it to me.
Where was he?
In Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. It's the home of mechanical
The
penises.
fine work on penises, right.
And then we had that session in the costume shop where we introduced them to Janet Bloor at Eurico, who did what they're rigged to and how we run the cables and all that. And they worked that out, Janet and Craig, sort of the mechanics of all that, with one of the dancers, one of the soldiers. And
He volunteered.
No, I chose the one I felt would be the most helpful.
They're quite wonderful.
They're wonderful, but I wanted the one I knew from Hello Dolly, who I knew would be focused and could communicate.
Yeah.
And
Are they everything you hoped?
they're a little big.
They are a little big. They are definitely a little, yes.
They are a little big.
Yes, yeah.
But the guys are tall.
Yes, this is true.
mercifully.
Yes.
Yes.
That actually had not occurred to me from the back row.
Well, no, I think it's all so much.
Showbiz.
Yeah.
And because their helmets
Yes,
and there's all
yes.
that.
And it's
going-
probably needed for the
Well,
bloke.
they're become
be seen.
these automatons about that sort of thing about
It's
them.
like it's like the Uber marionette.
Yes.
You know what I mean? That's what it was.
Yes.
Because at one point we talked about actually having figures, but then
It became so many things to do we could
No,
never.
this was
Yeah.
a great.
and also I know myself, and I know I'm going to change things 27 different times. And
as did we.
Yes, thank you very much, exactly. So it was, and there was intrinsically, if you were going to have these Uber marionettes, there was going to be such rigidity to it, and it became clear to me that we were going to wind up adjusting impulses to the rigidity of them instead of
it would have been
a nightmare.
A limiting.
Very absolutely.
Even with the best, and there are several puppet guys in the country who were amazing, but I think still would have been limiting.
Yeah, exactly. Because at one point they were stuck over there. Then you could move them. Then you could change them. Then they could climb up the mountain. And all of a sudden,
you could never.
You could never done
you
any of
really
where
do.
we ended up.
And the fact that they disappear.
Yes,
that's
and go
great.
back into
That's
the mound.
great,
That was one of my favorite moments. Just the fact that you go and each of those people in that mound had a life. And that's what becomes interesting to me about the appearance of Carol. Carol has a story, and she goes from being dead to alive again. And she has a story, as does each one of these bodies have a story. But we actually end up learning her story, and that was always very fascinating to me.
And she ends up disappearing into death.
100%. 100%.
Would you tell me about the shark?
Yes. About the shark?
Yes.
You mean where it came from as
Yes.
a choice?
Yes.
Isn't that just a Taylor joke?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because a lot
on
of
Is it?
on the baby.
Yeah, a lot of the references are contemporary references. Cleft Chin, Superman.
Yeah.
Flying rodents, Batman. So it's all these popular culture references that are Star Wars. Also, there's all these references that impose. At one point, I suggested, well, why aren't they? What if they were Shakespeare references? And he said, no, because in the order of plays, Julius, he doesn't want to have any references post when Titus Andronicus was written. So,
But we have Hamlet.
But we have Hamlet, exactly.
That for a split second every night, that makes me a little odd. I mean, a little feeling that, wait a minute, I have to jump out of this time period
And go to Hamlet?
get that. Yeah. I mean, then I
So
get
tell
it.
me about Shark.
Everyone likes it.
Is that a popular
I don't
reference
know it at
now?
all.
Shark?
Do you know Shark?
Sharks.
It
Well,
is?
actually, there is some song called Baby Shark. There was a brief, but there's a song, do you know this song? There's some called Baby Shark. It's a big thing. We briefly had a real baby, and
I know.
and
I was here for that
that
night.
that was an interesting moment, but the wonderful thing about babies is that they are unreliable, and the challenging thing about babies is that they're unreliable, but it's interesting. But it inspired a rewrite at the end of the play.
Which is
a wonderful
funny joke.
It's totally
Absolutely.
wonderful.
What is it? What did you just?
At the end, there's
rule.
Taylor did a rewrite about one of the rules about you never act with babies
Oh,
in a
right,
fish
right,
costume.
right.
But
It's
also,
like a W.C. Fields line.
Yes.
Never play
Exactly.
Philadelphia
Right.
or something. Or children.
Exactly.
It wasn't that great.
Yes.
It's not that great. a
Not
lot.
that great, but it is the
W.C.
same, it is the
Fields
same
or
joke.
The shark
No,
joke?
the joke. The repeat of the joke.
Oh.
Oh, okay. Was there anything that seemed impossible to do, like teen, when you first started?
Impossible.
Was like going, oh my God, how in the world? Was there any of that?
I'm not doing it for any sentimental reasons, but Santo is so understanding of what light can do. We did, on both shows, come to you and say, if we need a little more space here to get, and you did, you always accommodated us. And how you remembered, I would say to you, there's a glare over here. He wouldn't write anything down, but 3 days later there wasn't.
How
You know?
marvelous.
No,
Yeah.
but there's nothing. I mean, we had a big event in pre-production about getting these footlights in because of the architecture of the front edge of the stage, and it seems silly to have an impossibility like that, but there was a hard restriction about getting that person out in case of a fire.
The fire rule.
And
the
everything,
budget.
and the zigzag of this thing, and the budget, and God, you stuck with it and put Evan on it, and we solved it, and we didn't have to rebuild it at no extra cost to the management, and it came in as beautiful.
Yeah.
And it added so much to the visual of the show, both in terms of in front of the red curtain, in terms of on the bodies, that sense of music hall feel and everything, and it was a deep struggle in our world,
Well, we
but
went
there was
through many
nothing.
versions of
But
it.
but it would, on many productions, it would have been dismissed, or it would have been
Yeah.
sort of just, and it worked out so beautifully. I think we were.
Go ahead.
No, I don't think there was anything. Impossibility? No, I don't think so. I think we had everything firing for us.
Back to the footlights for a second, which was related to Santo also, about could they be normally they'd be in a straight line
Yeah.
across the front edge of the
Right.
stage, but the seats come so close, and we could not afford the strip lights that were thin. We
Right.
could only afford half of them. So half of them are thin, so therefore the front edge of the stage moves back and has a jog.
Yeah.
And I thought, Santo will never accept that. And you said something that was so smart. You said, only the first row will see that. Because the next row can't see
Yeah.
over the head of the next person.
Right.
But we're sensitive to the aesthetic of that, even.
But they don't.
However-
They don't. They sit
But, I
down
mean,
and
that's
it's like
the
they look over
but
it.
that's,
Exactly.
But that's the sensibility of knowing that, and of knowing that after decades of
Well,
of knowing it.
do say often still, I say, we obsess in the ground plan and the shapes and all that and adjusting it. And then you realize that we're not going to be hanging up there.
There's nobody looking from up
That you
there.
can't really tell many of those things.
Right.
It's.
Well, we also
I was mostly pleased in terms of our fiddling with when painting a strip of white on the back of the units
Worked.
still
Showed
worked
up.
the way, as
Showed
I
up.
said, it was,
Yeah.
it's like working with Sven Nykvist, and we put show card on the floor, and he bounced the light down and
Well,
up into
and
the
it
faces.
comes from Hollywood. Comes
Yeah,
from
yeah.
comes from just saying, we need to get a little skinny of light in here. Put a white card there, and our crew was like, what?
Like-
What are you doing?
And I
What are you
mean,
doing?
So yeah, we'll do that. I said we can use show card or paint it, or we'll go buy
white
a
cloth.
sheet. I said we'll go buy a top
White
sheet.
sheet.
Yeah, yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful, yeah.
And what was fun about this project for you?
Well, none of it. But this voice comes from a very different brain than you all. I am working with human beings. And as Oliver Smith said, doorknobs don't talk back. Beautifully said, Oliver. But seriously, the minute you are in a fitting room with a three-way mirror and you say, and your clothes are on the floor, the actor, it's a very delicate, sensitive operation because you're going to pretend that he and you are going to find a character when indeed you have it in the closet right here in the back and you're going to say, put this on. And that is something I've been doing for a million years, but it's still very sensitive and very, very difficult. Very. Nathan is I love working with him because his mind can get it in a second, but at the same time he can worry about whether he has a roll of fat here. That's very hard. As far as the three, well, actually Julie came in with the feeling that she was going to accommodate us, and she was a piece of cake. And I got a text from somebody saying, that peach Dacron dress I saw at the giant supermarket, something like that, joking. She was a piece of cake. But you know, you can talk about actors forever, about their sensitivities and whatnot. And for Christine, I was so worried about her. And there are actors and there are clowns. And I'm not really good at discerning. I'm not. So I can open my mouth and say the wrong thing. At the same time, I'm the big babe in the fitting room. So I don't think my life is ever going to get easier.
We did a show together a long time ago.
Yes.
This side of Paradise. F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Yes.
Oh, right.
And I remember.
Did we do it downtown?
Yes, only downtown.
Where?
Yes, at the
Circle?
Sheridan Square.
Sheridan Square, right on 7th
Yeah.
Avenue.
Yeah.
And I remember being downstairs in the off-Broadway dressing room. You were fitting somebody, and you said to the lady, you need to wear your hat more this
Yeah.
certain
Right.
angle for the period. And the woman said, I can't do it. They can't see my face.
Right.
And you said, we'll get another actor.
Thanks for bringing that up. Did you catch that?
I learned a lot, and I absolutely admired it.
It was a joke.
And today you and Meryl Streep are good friends.
Mel Strip.
Exactly. That's great.
I don't think so.
No.
No,
But
you
sometimes
got your
I
point
do.
across, and she changed it, and she then wore it that way.
Exactly. But it's also it's
My life is not as. It's really down and dirty. The costume world. It's flesh and perspiration and can I have this? And, it's very different than any other kind. I should not have. I always wanted to be an architect, and I changed my mind in a moment.
Never would have guessed it.
this show, I think, is one of the hardest things
No question.
I have ever worked
No
on
question.
in my entire life.
Ah.
And it's like even last year doing a show with 19 people, this has 3 people, even doing musicals, which are hateful, evil monsters while you're working on them, and hopefully you come out on the other side joyful, wonderful creatures. But this show was very, very, it was one of the hardest things I've ever worked on, aside from the fact that the dynamic of cast changes and all this sort of stuff, but it was
That did not hurt us.
It's not hurting. It was just there's wear and tear.
Well-
There is perpetual. You know, you're talking about you're in the room, the down and dirty, the wear and tear of every single. It's so very interesting when you're in the rehearsal room.
Yeah.
And you're making changes. Everybody has this sort of generous, chaotic, wonderful availability. When you get into a preview process, the actors have formulated a way of understanding which gives them a sense of command so that therefore they can go out there and be naked in front of an audience. So that every single time you change a and, a the, or a but, it requires them to reconfigure that internal mechanism so they can go out there and do it. And I think that because the play was so new, added to certain dynamics that happened through the course of the preview period, it was really perpetually intense for the actors and for Taylor and for myself in a way that maybe it's because, and in a way that I think was startling. It was startling and unbelievably draining and fascinating because it was so intense.
I actually did see you pale.
Yeah.
I could see you getting very done
very
in.
exhausting.
But the thing is that when she left the company, it's one of those things that makes no poetic sense at all, and it jarred us into a realism that had nothing to do with poetry, prose, first century, great acting. It was suddenly a big change, a big change.
Yeah.
And how are we going to get it on soon?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Producer saying, come on, give us a shot.
Yeah.
You know, and that was, and the emotional wear and tear, and then the fact that they've come out on the other side is just a thrilling
Yeah.
thing.
yeah,
It's
amazing.
really thrilling because I think it is that naked bravery that actors have is just, you
Yes.
know, it's like I could do one performance and then I'd go, okay, now who's going to be doing the rest of the run? That was fun, and now I'm out of here. Who's going to do it for the rest of the time? So that sense of bravery, I think, was incredible. I don't know, anything else that comes to your mind? And Santo, you still didn't say what your favorite thing is about me, but I'm sure there's so many, your brain is just stymied. It's just stymied. The words.
Great dancer, great kisser.
Exactly. Because one of the questions, there were questions that were written out for me, which I sort of didn't. One of the questions was for me, George, speak to what it was like working with 4 geniuses. And I said,
I want the list.
I said, which 4 are you referring? Anyway, anything else?
That just means old man, I think.
Does it?
Yes.
Yeah.
You mean if you're a genius at 80, you weren't a genius at 12?
It took people that
you
long
were
to
an-
realize
You were
it.
an exception.
Exactly. Anything else? Anything else?
I mean, I would just say that what you did, George, in the circumstance and with us, and we've done a lot of shows together, was so smooth and so commanding. We didn't have any fear. We didn't have any real bumps in the road, upset. It was only about finding what the work was, and we had each other, Santo, day to day. And we had a marvelous time. I mean, it was complicated.
And
it was,
painful.
and but it wasn't.
What did you say?
But it wasn't.
Painful.
But it wasn't scary. It wasn't scary, and that's because.
Well, we're in it together. God
And-
knows. It's
but,
not
but
like
there was
we,
never
it's
any.
not like
there was
we
no
were all
combat,
Garys.
and there was no combat. There was no combat. But also, I mean, you were really like athletically turning this thing forward, and we just felt like we were, you know, in your draft, you know, which was really great. I mean, we had a really splendid time. We had a great crew here, and the set was more than we ever, you know, hoped for, and loved
the
every.
set is
We loved every
gorgeous.
iteration of it. Every
Gorgeous.
time there were more bodies,
I
we
think
were
it's
like,
the most
bring
beautiful
on
set I ever worked on.
more bodies.
It's the most
It is
beautiful
beautiful.
set you've
It
ever
is
worked
Oh,
on.
Anne, how weird that is.
I can't help it. I'm weird.
That was almost shy, Santo. Well, thank you all for a lovely, vibrant, exciting, fun conversation and a lovely, vibrant, exciting journey working on Gary on Broadway. That
Thank
sounded
you.
like a spokesperson. Working on Gary
Not
on
since,
Broadway.
Not since Omnibus.
I'm gonna ask you
Exactly.
something.